When I got the idea initially, it would be going back when I was a young fella back in the 50s, and I saw all the locomotives up for scrapping. So it was actually this particular locomotive I have here, A55, was brought in to replace the steam. So when they came for withdrawal, this is when I actually approached CIE and actually sold me one for the princely sum of £1,600. And when I got the idea of the museum, it was to give the impression as after crashing through the wall of the pub. But I had this envisaged what I wanted to do with it, and I had a lot of stuff gathered over the years. So the whole idea was actually to build a museum around the train, would have that as the centrepiece. Didn't realise what I was landing myself into until I got involved. It took 3 years for that to come about, until finally I brought down the locomotive. I had to, first of all, I had to come along and I had to make a place for it, so I had to dig out the whole area then, and keeping in mind the Castlerea is built in a bog, so it had to have a very solid foundation. So first of all you put in the ballast, that's the stones, and then you came along then and put in the track. That was all done prior to the locomotive arriving here. First of all, I got down the wheels and all that business, and then I got the body. The train actually was diesel electric, so that meant that the engine part where the tables are was actually the generator driven by diesel, and that in turn then worked the traction motors which were below in the base of the train. They were built originally in Manchester between 1955 and 1957. They built 60 of them, so it took that 2 years to get them all over here. So it actually came from Manchester originally. When they were introduced here in that time, they put a marine engine in them, and that wasn't a bit successful. So in 1970, 71, around that time, they replaced all the engines, and when this engine was called A, and then it went over to O. So it was called A55, and then it went back to O55. And it worked from that time, 1955, until they were withdrawn completely in April 1995. So you're talking about a period of 40 years, which was great service on the railway, you know. On the train, it's very, very simple. You have the accelerator on the right, then you have a train brake, and you have a loco brake. Both are independent. And then you have the dead man's pedal, and that is purposely there in case the driver happened to die, that the brakes will come on. But when these engines were introduced first, it meant that if you left your foot on it or left your bag on it, it operated. But in 1956, there was a driver coming out of Boyle, he fell fast asleep. He came into Kilfree Junction. The signalman couldn't let him go through because he hadn't got the staff for him to go to Ballymote, so the train was let go up the side and then crashed. But after that crash, they brought in what they call a vigilance. It meant that every 2 minutes a bell would go, so if you didn't take your foot off it, or in case you might have your bag on it, the brakes would automatically come on themselves. People don't realise that in the steam days, the trains were actually driven in the dark, pitch dark, and the driver and the fireman would have known the road that well that they knew exactly where they were. And it's hard to imagine that going at 70 miles an hour in the dark. So then in 1970, when they re-engined them, they put the light over the head then, you see, you know. I loved the steam myself because it was actually alive, and you had to make sure you had enough water, and you had to make sure you had enough coal, and there was certain art then in actually firing an engine. You had to make sure that you built your fire up properly. It wasn't a matter of just throwing coal into it, you know. The train could go both directions, and you could drive it on each side. When you were going, say, head first, you know, you would put on the white lights in the front and the red lights in the back. So then when you were going the opposite direction, you could put the white lights in the front and the red lights in the back. And the one advantage with this locomotive when introduced, in the steam days you had to have what they call a turntable. What this meant was that they could drive it from both ends without having to go to the necessity of putting it on a turntable to bring it around, you know. Oh, we had an opening here, we had a band here, and we had people, relations of mine were dressed up in 1955 gear, and we actually brought one fella from Castlerea station, John Kennedy, and we brought him in to open the museum at the time. And we did a parade down the town, and it was a great night, and we had dancing and all that. It was a great celebration. If you have a dream, and if you work at the dream, it'll come true.